think Jill's just checking to see if we're live.
You're good to go.
Thank you so much, Madam Clerk. So hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. I'm the Vice Chair of Regional Center Community Council. I've been asked to sit in by Sam Austin, our Chair, as the appeal before us is for a property in his district. So I'd like to thank the Mayor of the Regional Center for that. So I'll call this meeting to order, and I'd like to ask the members to introduce themselves in the order identified. We'll start with Tony Mancini.
Good evening, Mr. Vice Chair and colleagues. Tony Mancini, District 6 from beautiful Dartmouth.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Councillor Smith, you sent regrets and then you arrived anyway. It's like magic. Councillor Smith.
I'm here and weeks and plans change sometimes, but I'm here and excited to be here with the group.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Councillor Smith. Going to Sean Cleary, Councillor for District 9.
Thank you, Mr. Fill-in Chair and our regular chair and our vice chair. So happy to be here from District 9, Halifax West, Armdale. And I rode between the District 9 border, Oxford Street, and the District 8 border earlier today on my bicycle. And one of our wonderful police officers, Sean Curry, was actually standing guard at the Oxford and Allen and Oak intersection, reminding drivers that they now have to turn left or right. They cannot go straight across Allen or Oak with the new local street bikeway intersection and new half signals that are there. So thank you to Police Officer Curry for his sage advice and patience with the drivers going through the intersection.
And as an avid cyclist himself, I can't imagine Constable Curry being happier than he probably was today. So I'm Wayne Mason, Councillor for District 7, and I will be your host this evening. Let's go through staff, and I see some are here and some aren't. I'm not sure if Aaron McIntyre is on the call. Looks like a no, and that's all right because we have Sean Otis, Principal Planner. Sean, mic check.
Hello. Right, can you hear me?
Perfect.
Okay.
And Matthew Conlon, let's see if your mic is still working.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can, that's great, thank you. Meg McDougall, our solicitor this evening.
Oh, good evening, Mr. Chair.
Hi there. And Liam McSween, the hardest working man in show business.
Good evening, councillors. How you doing?
Doing great. And Jill, our legislative assistant this evening. Liam McSween, the hardest working man in show business. Oh, you've still got the YouTube up in the background, so we're hearing it on significant delay. Well, we know you're there, so while you work that out, I guess we actually need you for approval of minutes and whatnot in a second. So you may want to go onto the YouTube and mute YouTube on the player so that you can see it still running, but participate in the live meeting through Zoom. Let's see if that works. So how's everybody feeling about COVID at this point? Right? Going to be back in City Hall any day now?
Wasn't there 31 new cases today?
Maybe not. Yeah, maybe not.
It's what passes for light conversation, Mr. Chair.
I'm double vaxxed. I'd go to a meeting at Harbor East Marine Drive Community Council. I'd be fine with that. Jill, are you there? Are you able to participate? I'd go to a meeting at Harbor East Marine Drive Community Council. Yeah, that's me laughing. Be able to participate. So Jill,
I'm having a bit of an issue with feedback, but I think we're good otherwise.
It sounds to me like you still have YouTube open. Maybe you want to close your browser and just have Zoom open. Sounds to me like you still have YouTube open. Maybe you want to. Just sounds so good twice, you know, like advice so nice you hear it twice. There. Now, Jill, can you hear me through Zoom? Sounds so good twice. Nope.
Mr. Chair, perhaps someone could call our clerk and just check in with her offline, because I'm not sure who's going to, we only have one item of business.
Yeah. I mean, so Jill, I see you're no longer muted. Are you able to speak now, and is it working?
I think we are good now.
Okay, great. Let's move right on. 2, approval of the minutes of June 28th, 2021. I'd ask someone to put the motion on the floor.
I can move that.
Second.
Moved by Councillor Austin, seconded by Councillor Cleary. Are there any errors or omissions in the minutes? Seeing none, we'll call for the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. Thank you very much. We'll now move to approval of the order of business and approval of additions and deletions. I'll ask the clerk if there are any additions or deletions to the agenda.
There are no additions or deletions.
Thank you very much for that. Committee, do you have any additions or deletions to the agenda? Seeing none, I'll ask for a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
So moved, Councillor Cleary.
Moved by Councillor Cleary, seconded by Councillor Smith, that we adopt the order of business as presented. We'll move to a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries unanimously. So there's no business arising out of the minutes. So we move to a call for declaration of conflict of interest. I ask any councillors of the conflict to declare and to state which agenda item that may be. It's going twice. Thank you very much for that. So no conflicts of interest. There's no motions of reconsideration, none of rescission. There's no deferred business. There's no tabled items, which brings us to item 10.1 public hearings. Case 23339, appeal of a variance approval, 10 Lancaster Drive. So thank you for joining us today for a virtual appeal hearing of a variance approval for 10 Lancaster Drive. The order of events today is that this virtual hearing will be the same as a regular variance approval hearing. We'll start with a staff presentation, and then the applicant will have an opportunity to present via telephone or Zoom. I think they're in the meeting there. After the applicant speaks, the respondent can make their presentation. As a reminder to the speakers and those watching at home, this is an appeal of a variance approval, so only the parties are allowed to speak. The only parties who are allowed to speak are the individuals who live in the notification area, who registered an appeal of the development officer's decision, and the property owner is allowed to speak as well. So with that, we'll go to Mr. Conlon for the staff presentation.
Perfect. Thank you, Vice Chair. Do you want my video to stay off, or doesn't matter?
If you can try it on, that's great. I may regret that choice, sure, but let's see.
Well, if anything goes wrong, just stop me and we'll problem solve on the fly.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. So good evening, Vice Chair and members of Council. My name is Matthew Conlon. I'm Planner 1 with Land Development and Subdivision. This evening I'll be presenting case 23339 as described before. This is an appeal of a variance request which was approved at 10 Lancaster Drive in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. Next slide, please. So as a bit of quick background, we are dealing with 2 different zones on this property, which we'll see soon enough. Both the R1 zone and the HR1 zone are involved in this, this lot. The single family residential zone under the R1 for the Dartmouth land use bylaw, as well as the high order residential 1 zone under the Halifax Regional Centre land use bylaw, which I'll refer to as center plan for short, and that is package A for center plan. And specifically, as mentioned before, this is 10 Lancaster Drive in Dartmouth that we're speaking about. It is worth noting, and I'll bring this up a few times as we go through the presentation, this lot is now officially 2 separate pieces of land that were subdivided. However, at the time of application, when this first came into our office, 10 Lancaster Drive was actually one large piece of land that fronted on both Lancaster Drive and Woodland Avenue. And as mentioned there on the slide in front of you, in March of 2021, the subdivision process was completed and approved to divide it into 2. And as I said, I'll go over that a few times as we go through the slides. So the application that came into our office was a permit to construct a new institutional building, a church to be specific. Both zones, the R1 and HR1, permit this use in the zone. And for the first 15 meters from the front lot line, which is Lancaster Drive inwards, this is all zoned HR1 under the center plan package A land use bylaw, which we'll see in just a moment. As such, a transition line and a setback do apply at the zoning boundary between HR1 and the R1 zone, and I'll get into that a little bit later on. But the point to keep in mind here is that this zoning boundary and transition line that we're dealing with today is actually an internal line within the lot itself, which is somewhat unique. So a portion of the church, about 3 meters of it, the closest to Lancaster Drive, is proposed within the HR1 zone. And as such, a setback of 6 meters from the transition line is prescribed by the center plan land use bylaw. In order to facilitate the development as it is proposed today, a variance has been requested. Next slide, please. So you'll see in front of you on the left-hand side the site plan that was provided in the submission. As you can see on the left-hand side, you're looking at essentially the entirety of the old 10 Lancaster Road property. Everything that is shown on the top left-hand end is where the church is actually sited, as well as a parking lot below it, and everything in the white below that is actually open space that was initially all 10 Lancaster Drive. On the right hand side, you can see I've highlighted both the current 10 Lancaster Drive in its smaller form, as well as the small white portion that is zoned HR1 as well, just to show you what the old former entirety of that site used to look like as well. Next slide, please. So moving in a little bit closer now to the site itself, what I tried to show for you is the transition between the HR1 and the R1 zone. Again, the HR1 zone is the center plan land use bylaw, and it occupies about the first 15 meters of the front of Lancaster Drive. And along that line that's been highlighted by the 2 arrows on the right-hand side, you can see that red line that's showing the area within the HR1 zone. Because this is into the HR1 zone and thus into center plan, the bylaw prescribes that within the HR1 zone, among a few other zones, if you do have a property that is abutting another zone, a transition line is required, and thus a 6 meter setback from that transition line is prescribed. Next slide, please. So before we move a little bit further, I thought I would just take a second to try and elaborate on what is a transition line. What's the idea behind it? So I've shown for you policy 4.15, which is right out of the municipal planning strategy for the center plan package A. And essentially what it's trying to say is there is a need to establish transition lines between mid-rise, tall mid-rise, and high-rise buildings, which are larger and larger density and heights of buildings as it aligns with lower residential low-rise buildings. And so in essence, what a transition line is trying to do is saying if we have higher density zones next to lower density zones, Essentially, irregardless of what it is that you're trying to build, the bylaw prescribes you need to have a 6-meter setback from the transition line itself, which is always going to be the change from one zone to another. As you can see on the left-hand side, this is a bit of a unique situation, as I alluded to before. Typically, a transition line would be the boundary between one lot and another. As you can see with the red arrow, the property line showing PID 41496415 is separated from the PID, the lot next door, which is Civic 10 Lancaster Drive. However, the zoning boundary in question is the one in front with the blue arrow, and what that's showing is an actual internal zoning boundary, but not a property boundary separating one piece of land from another. So this is a somewhat more unique situation because there is a request to separate this building that's being proposed 6 meters back from the zoning line, but it's not actually creating any separation from any types of buildings or a possible building that could be built there, because this is a zoning line within the boundaries of the lot itself. As you can see on the left-hand side, I just took a snapshot out of the center plan bylaw itself to show that black, heavy black line is showing the transition line that is prescribed within the bylaw itself. Next slide, please. So as a little bit of background to the permit itself, the original site plan you can see on the left-hand side shows the proposed site for the church 12 meters from the front lot line and Lancaster Drive. This means that the first 3.2 meters of the building were within the HR1 zone, which requires a transition line setback and site plan approval level 1 through the center plan's prescribed requirements. So a discussion was had between our office and the applicant, and what the applicant decided is they would actually revise the site plan and push the entire church back behind the zoning boundary. So this would mean pushing the church back to 15.2 meters back from the front lot line, which is Lancaster Drive, at which point the church is entirely located within the Dartmouth land use bylaw and the R1 zone. As such, no variance is required, and this permit was approved for construction as it met all requirements for the R1 zone within the Dartmouth land use bylaw. However, discussions were had with our office and the applicant with the understanding that the applicant still wanted to have this church sited in its original spot, which would be approximately 12 meters from the front lot line. And so it was agreed that this was acceptable. They could begin construction for the approved building, which would be entirely within the R1 zone of Dartmouth land use bylaw, and apply for a variance to allow for the possibility of moving the building to its original site of approximately 12 meters setback from the front lot line along Lancaster Drive, which would then mean about 3.2 meters of the side of the building itself is within the HR1 zone. However, this would also mean that not only is it on the transition line, it's actually over the transition line. And as such, this would mean that the land use bylaw for center plan would prescribe a 6-meter setback from the transition line and the zoning boundary itself. And this is where we find ourselves today. A variance was submitted to our office, and subsequently, after all of our reviews and processes, our office did approve the variance. As a part of the variance process, a mail out is sent out to the neighboring residents in a 30-meter radius, which essentially gives them the update that the development officer has considered this variance and is ready to approve it. But first, it is sent out to the neighbors who do have the right to appeal if they feel that this variance is not something that should be approved. And that is why we are here today, as we did receive 2 appeals to this variance. And as such, the matter is in front of council today. Next slide, please. So just as a quick summary of the variance request itself, it's 6 meter is the requirement that is prescribed by the bylaw. You can see here in the image, I've highlighted in blue the area that is actually within the HR1 zone. And the blue arrow is showing you the difference between the HR1 zone on the left-hand side of the line and the R1 zone and the vast majority of the church on the right-hand side of the zone. The variance request is to 0 meters because, of course, not only is the building going right to that boundary, but it's going over it as well. Next slide, please. So just to reiterate, the site plan itself for the proposed development, as you see here, this is still the old site plan, which is showing the entire 10 Lancaster Drive as one lot. It has since been subdivided into 2 lots. However, everything you see within this image is still contained within the current Civic 10 Lancaster Drive that was created through the subdivision process. So there is nothing that is actually going over into the other lot. It'll all still be contained within 10 Lancaster Drive's boundaries. Next slide, please. So from an elevation standpoint, we are currently looking at the front elevation. When I say front, this means we're standing on Lancaster Drive. This would be looking from the front lot line. You can see in the top right-hand corner, I've shown a little inset drawing with an arrow to show you the perspective of where we're standing. This is the front elevation, but officially it's the side of the building. I've also highlighted for you the area in which the transition line setback is required for this portion of the side of the church itself. Next slide, please. And now moving to this would actually be the side elevation, but it is the front entrance of the building. So the building is gaining its main access from the side of the lot itself. Looking now on the right-hand side of the building, the south elevation, we're looking at the main entrance, and to your left-hand side, you can see again in that blue box, the area that is under variance for the transition line setback. Next slide, please. Again, the side elevation now from the left-hand side or looking from the north, and you can again see the entirety of the church that is being proposed, as well as the area that is under question for the variance for transition setback. Next slide, please. And finally, the rear elevation, which is the east side of the building. And again, just to get a perspective of the building itself that's being constructed here. Next slide, please. So for a variance to be refused, at least one of the following 3 criteria must be observed. And this is right out of the Halifax Charter. Either A, the variance violates the intent of the land use bylaw, B, the difficulty experienced is general to the properties in the area, or C, the difficulty experienced results from an intentional disregard for the requirements of the land use bylaw. As outlined in the staff report, it was determined the request for a variance did not fall into any of these 3 categories you see on the slide, and thus was deemed an acceptable variance request that was approved by the development officer. In terms of the first category, for intent of the land use bylaw, building setbacks help to ensure that structures maintain adequate separation from adjacent structures, streets, and property lines for access, safety, and aesthetics. This lot is within 2 separate land use bylaw areas, both the Dartmouth land use bylaw and the Regional Centre land use bylaw. The transition line setbacks are intended to support a transition to adjacent low-rise residential neighborhoods and dwellings. Within the context of this zone, the zoning boundary and subsequent transition line does not follow a property line, providing a transition between 2 abutting properties. It is internal to the lot itself. The applicant is requesting to construct the building closer to the required transition line, and where the transition line is intended to provide separation from abutting properties, it was not felt the request violated the intent of the land use bylaw. For difficulty general to the properties in the area, in evaluating variance requests, staff must determine if general applications of the bylaw creates a specific difficulty or hardship that is not broadly present in the area. In these circumstances, if these circumstances exist, then consideration can be given to the requested variance. If the difficulty is general to the properties in the area, then the variance should be refused. The transition line on this property is unusual as it does not follow property lines, but is instead an internal line approximately 15 meters inward of the front property line. This situation was felt to be unique and not general to the properties in the area. And finally, for the third criteria, in reviewing a proposal for intentional disregard for the requirements of the land use bylaw, there must be evidence that the applicant had knowledge, of the requirements of the land use bylaw relative to their proposal and then took deliberate action which was contrary to those requirements. The majority of the building is outside of the transition line setback, and a permit has been issued for work outside of this area. Until this matter has been dealt with, the permit is issued does not authorize work within the transition line setback. Next slide, please. So the options in front of council are as follows. Council may overturn the decision of the development officer and allow the appeal, or council may uphold the development officer's decision and deny the appeal. This is the recommended alternative from our office. This concludes my presentation. I'm available for question as well. Sean is as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Conlon. That was a model of clarity. Appreciate that. We have some questions from Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just two questions. I think I know the answer to both of them. I think the answer to one just flipped by there ever so briefly on that concluding slide. First, would a transition line be required if it was institutional zoning, because we're literally months away from that likely being the outcome for this property? And then the second question, is the development otherwise in terms of setbacks entirely within the bylaw in terms of the ER1, the R1 properties on Cannon Terrace? There is no infringement on the setback required from their property lines, correct?
Through the chair to you, Councillor Austin. That is correct. If we could just bring up the slides again and go to slide 16, as you alluded to, I had a feeling this question might come up, so I had a slide here just in case. Slide 15, pardon me. As that's coming up, the answer is there is a requirement for a front yard setback prescribed through, thank you. Oh, that's not up yet. Sorry, looking at my own screen. There is a requirement for front yard setbacks and side yard setbacks, and where a lot abuts an ER3, an ER2, there we go, an ER3, an ER2, an ER1, or a few other zones, the 6 meter setback is still required, but it is only talking about where it's abutting such lot lines on a side yard setback. So you'll see on the far left-hand side, the proposed minimum front setbacks along Lancaster and Woodland Drive are both 1.5 meters. This is all being pulled from the proposed land use bylaw for Center Plan Package B, which is still in draft, but in the institutional zone, this would not be a requirement to have a 6 meter setback from the area that we're talking about. It would simply be a 1.5 meter front yard setback and 2.5 meter setback, pardon me, it would be asking for a 6 meter setback on the sides.
So does this, I mean, just because of the peculiar orientation of this, does this need for a variance go away when the second chunk of the center plan becomes law, if it passes in its current draft?
Yes, I'd have to look at the sides to be sure that that proposed section 261 subsection 1 is being met. But from the perspective of the requirement that we're dealing with today, which is along the front, yes, this would be cleared up entirely through Center Plan Package B, and the requirement would be a minimum of 1.5 meters of a front yard setback. And currently the building is proposing a 12 meter front yard setback.
And so thank you for that. And so then the other part of my question, there's no variance here in terms of a request to come closer to the rear property lines of homes along Cannon Terrace. This is entirely on that weird flag running along Lancaster.
That is correct, Councillor. By virtue of the variance not being upheld, and thus a requirement to push the building back 6 meters from the transition line, it would effectively be requiring the building going from 12 meters front yard setback to 21 meters setback from the front lot line along Lancaster. Because of the nature of how Cannon Terrace is situated for the back of all of those properties, it is technically possible that they might actually get closer in terms of the building and the rear lot lines of those Cannon Terrace properties. So essentially right now, the church is asking to be as far away as possible with the 12-meter setback that they've asked for.
So this one, because this allows them to move it a little bit further this way, it takes them away from the backyards, which are on because of Cannon Terrace's angle here. So it actually allows it to be further away from the homes.
Yes, I would say that's probably the best way to put it, because Cannon Terrace has an angle as you go up the street. There is more chance, if the building is pushed back, that more buildings will be closer to the church if it had to be pushed back 9 meters from where it is now, because not only would it have to be set back 6 meters from the transition line itself, but there's 3 meters that's already in front of the transition line. So there's a total of 9 meters it would have to be additionally pushed back. And I would say that is probably going to mean it's closer to a lot more properties on Cannon Terrace than it is currently as it's proposed.
Okay, thank you so much for your detailed answers.
Thank you, Councillor Austin. Councillor Mancini.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. And that was my questions too. And by the way, thank you, Matthew, for the presentation. I was kind of confused on you had your slide, the permanent background graphic slide, and you showed the graph with the 12 meters and the 15 meters as what being proposed in the variance. That is actually further away, which Sam just asked about. That makes it further away from the other properties. Am I hearing that correctly? I'm trying to understand, and I guess we'll have to wait for those who are appealing this, find it from their perspective why they're appealing it. But when I just heard her explanation, if it as being proposed, it actually is further away from the other properties. Is that correct?
Through the chair to Councillor Mancini. Yes, that is correct. If we could pull up slide number 6, if that's possible. And as that's coming up, I can still answer the question. Essentially, yes, your question is correct. The way the property was initially proposed, the building would be 12 meters setback from the front lot line, which is Lancaster Drive.
Right.
The requirement to have a transition line setback of 6 meters would actually require that the building be pushed back to a total of 21 meters setback from Lancaster Drive,
Right.
which would mean the church itself is now closer to quite a few more properties, because the farther you push back through the property itself, the more you're going to see more properties next door on Cannon Terrace, and I suppose through the fact that it's being pushed back, also Veridian Drive, which is to the sharing a rear lot line.
Yes.
So yes, the quick answer is if this was to need the 6 meter setback, it is going to be closer to more properties than it is currently situated right now.
Okay, thank you for that. I look forward to those appealing to understand their opposition to it. Thank you very much. Thank you, Vice Chair.
Thank you, councillors. There's no further questions, so I will open the appeal of the site plan approval hearing, and I will first check with the clerk. There's some question if both of them had joined us this evening. I understand Josette McCauley and Eric Thrush are here, and Craig Idris and Joanna Sadak may not be. Could we have a confirmation of that?
Yes, Josette McCauley is here. I have not heard from the other appellant.
All right, well, we'll go ahead. Josette, is she on phone or is she in the Zoom call?
She is in the Zoom call and she's been promoted at this point.
Perfect. Well, let's get a mic check, and I have to remind that you have 5 minutes to speak, and the clerk will give you a 30-second warning when you're approaching the end of your time, and I'd ask you to wrap up at 5 minutes. So let's see if we can hear. Let's do a mic check first. This won't count for your time. Can we hear you? Josette? Hello. So we're having what has become the usual mic problems that we have. So if you look down on your Zoom, you can see the mute button with the little microphone on the bottom left side. There's a little arrow there. You may need to click that and then change which. If you click that arrow, you'll see select microphone, and you may need to change the microphone you've chosen. And then if none
I don't
of
think
this
she can hear anything, Wei. She's mentioned in the chat she can't hear anything at all.
Okay. So maybe we get you call in. Do we have a number before I do that, Jill?
We will email her some instructions here in just one moment.
Clerk is going to email you instructions so you can call in on reliable old-fashioned cell phone or landline.
This never happens when Councillor Austin's chairing.
Anybody got any funny stories they want to tell to kill time? No.
Isn't this when the Jeopardy theme is supposed to play? Siri, play the Jeopardy theme song.
Oh, that's the wrong song. That implies that we will cut her off if 60 seconds have passed or whatever. I will say, I was texting Lindell earlier that these temporary SJAM, St. Joe A. Murray McKay site just looks so good. Like, staff did an outstanding job. And the home and school has done a bunch of painting and stuff, which I helped fund through district capital. And we had talked about doing a joint mixer. Lindell and the principal at Lamarche and St. Thomas and at SJAM was like, so there's 540 kids at LMST and there's 400 kids at SJAM. So that would be 940 kids and their parents. So around could be like 3,000 people at one place at one time. So I don't think we're doing that.
What's the student count at Citadel?
1,200.
Right. So
it's almost the same. Yep. Yeah, I was supposed to call the principal today. I got to call her on Wednesday after council. But yeah, so Lindell, the person who had the best offer, best quote for doing the painting is Kara, whose kid goes to SJAM. And so she like texts me. She's like, what color do you want the benches? I'm thinking SJAM colors. So if you go there now, they're yellow and blue and red in the colors of the SJAM colors. It's awesome.
Yeah, I'm gonna take a scoot if we get done here. Just go take a look. I gotta go downtown anyway.
Yeah, it's so good. if we get done here. Not seeming likely at this point.
I see you in the chat that said they can hear again. So maybe you want to give your instructions again. Maybe that might help.
Okay, so let's do a voice check and see if we can hear you. Josette, I think it is. Oh, we're in twice. Hello, can you?
Hi there.
Hey!
I'm sorry, I don't know what.
This is literally just another day at the office for us. So
Okay, sorry about
that. A meeting, it wouldn't be a meeting in COVID times if this didn't happen. So just to let you know, our clerk, and how do you say your name?
Josette.
Josette. So Josette, I wasn't that far wrong.
No, that's...
Jill is going to time you. You have 5 minutes to speak. She will give you a 30-second warning, and then I'll ask you to wrap up at 5 minutes. And so the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Okay, I wasn't expecting to be the only one from the neighborhood to speak, so I was hoping to not speak at all. I appealed because for me, this church is extremely close to me. So it would have been better for it to move further down, to be a little bit further away from my property than right where it is. And with the amount of land that the church has, I didn't really understand why it needed a variance and why it couldn't just build on the property that they had.
Were you able to hear, I'm sorry, I'm breaking all the rules, but were you able to hear the presentation by staff?
Yes, I just listened to it, and I wish I had heard it before I had written in my appeal, because it made a lot more sense. But I don't really understand the point of appealing a variance that's already approved and already built. So I don't understand why the neighborhood wouldn't have been able to hear this before. Like, nothing's going to happen now. That church is, you know, built and on the land. They're not going to say, oh yes, we listened to you, Josette, and now you have to move it back. It's a done deal. So I don't understand why the appeal process is the way it is.
So the way it works is you make your statements, and then we thank you. If there's any technical questions, they'll be asked by the counselors, and then the answer would come through your counselor or through staff at the end.
So I guess that's all I had to say. It's okay. I don't like, it's a done deal. It's built, and I understand more now from I think it was Matthew's presentation. I wish we had been given that presentation before, you know, before I got to this point, I guess.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Are there any questions from council? Councillor Austin would like to ask a question.
Not of Josette. I was volunteering that I'll ask her a question to staff when we get to that point, Mr. Chair.
I wasn't ask her a question, it's you will ask her question. Perfect.
Yes, I will ask her a question.
Does anybody else have any comments or questions? Seeing none, thank you so much. You can stick around for the rest of the public hearing and see how wonderfully smooth these things run in this time. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate that.
Thank you for giving me the chance to talk, even though I didn't have a whole lot to say.
No, I appreciate you sticking it out. So thank you. So, Madam Clerk, we don't have any other applicants at this time. Is that correct?
That is correct. We do have the respondent is in the meeting and prepared to speak as well.
So we have no further questions of clarification from council. So we will move to the respondent, Mark Van Zumeren from BD Stevens, who will also have 5 minutes and get a 30-second warning. Mark, are you on the call?
I am, yes.
Oh, it worked first time. Fantastic. We're really cooking with gas now. So you can start now. And if you have anything you want to add in response to that, please go ahead.
Sure. Good evening, councilors, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. As you know, my name is Mark Van Zoomer, and I'm a resident of District 5, and I'm calling from my office in District 6. But I'm speaking this evening on behalf of the property owners, the Dartmouth First Baptist Church. I'm a civil engineer with BD Stevens, the design builders of the new church, and my job is primarily that of planning and design for our various projects. I've read the letters of appeal, and I want to assure you that we share the appellant's concern of maintaining vegetated buffers between the church and our R1 neighbors. In fact, this variance has been made clear, was requested primarily to achieve and enhance that buffer. The variance is for the encroachment on the R1 zone boundary, which serves to move the church development further from the existing single-family homes within our common R1 zone, i.e. a variance to the benefit of the neighbors. In our eyes, it would appear that the appeals are more of an issue of miscommunication or misunderstanding of the nature of the variance than that of actual harm from the variance. So with that assumption, I'll describe how we got here. Looking at map 3 in your report, in the staff report, with the zoning and transition line, at the time of rezoning, a portion of the church property, at the time of rezoning a portion of the church property from R1 to HR1 back in 2018, 2019, in the absence of surety on how close to woodland the driveway access from the R1 zone to the public street Lancaster could be located, the zone boundary, or that funny leg shown by the blue line, was extended along Lancaster conservatively to include worst case scenarios, meaning we had to put it way over closer to Cannon Terrace. Our understanding at the time of the rezoning was that once the driveway was located as close to woodland, i.e. as far away from Cannon as possible, and we received driveway approval in May of 2020, the property would be subdivided accordingly, which it has, and that's shown as the red line, i.e. the internal line would be formalized to match the property boundaries. And the zone boundary would automatically revert to match that property boundary, which it hasn't. Or in the absence of an automatic, it would be adjusted as a housekeeping amendment in the center plan package B, either of which would make the variance and the subsequent appeal process moot. What this resulted in was the site layout that's shown on map 2, the site plan in the staff report. The shared driveway for both the church and the future HR1 site and all the associated traffic with those two uses has been moved as far from the existing single family homes as possible and has been effectively shielded to those houses by the church building itself. And the church has been squeezed as close to the driveway as possible. And this now encroaches on what is really a needless portion of the HR1 zone, or the access leg. And this encroachment on the HR1 zone also enabled us to locate the site development further from the existing homes than the 20-foot promised, and to maintain a significant stand of mature trees in the western corner of our site. That's the site portion immediately behind the first 4 homes on Cannon Terrace. As this is a no harm variance that in fact serves to benefit all the affected parties, including the adjacent homeowners, we respectfully ask that the Regional Center Community Council deny the appeal and let the variance approval stand. Thank you all again.
Thank you very much. There's nothing in the chat, but I'll ask, are there any questions of clarification from council? I'm seeing some shaking of heads, so thank you very much for that. We'll now move on. I'll look for a motion to close the appeal hearing.
I move that we close the appeal hearing, Mr. Chair.
Motion moved by Councillor Austin, seconded by Councillor Cleary. Any further discussion? Seeing none, move to a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. So there's no further speakers at this point. I guess we'll just move straight to what are the wishes of council. Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to start, I wanted to ask Josette's question about the property being a done deal. I know Matthew talked about different potential layouts. The area that this variance impacts, nothing has been built on that so far. Is that correct?
I believe that is correct. To be honest, I have not been out to the site in a little while, so I would defer to potentially Mr. Van Zoomeren to answer that. But the permit that was issued was specifically for construction within the Dartmouth land use bylaw area, the R1 zone, and the area in question within the HR1 is the matter that we're trying to solve through a variance.
Okay. I don't think we can bring the church back at this point, Mr. Chair, unfortunately. It would have been nice to have known that piece, because I mean that's one of the criteria of the variance. But I take it on faith that this small area has not been touched yet. But I guess maybe it has. I haven't been up to Lancaster in the last week or so. With in mind, I mean, I think Josette's point about if she had some of this presentation earlier, maybe it would have things gone differently, because you get a notice, and I think it's an entirely reasonable reaction. You get a notice in the mail from HRM saying your neighbor wants to vary how close the setback lines are. There's big disruption going on in the neighborhood with the church. I think it's understandable to look at that and say, well, they shouldn't be allowed to come closer to the property. But what this is simply this kind of leftover stub of a flag lot running along Lancaster. It's not about the backyards of the homes. In fact, it moves it further away from them, but still within that permitted distance. So for this one, I think we should deny the appeal, and I would look to you, Mr. Chair, if memory, or maybe our solicitor or clerk, whoever, if memory serves with appeals, we have to put the appeal motion on the floor and then defeat it.
So the motion for a variance appeal will always be a motion to allow the appeal, and then you as the mover can ask whether you want it supported or not.
Thank you. So I would move that we allow the appeal, and I would ask.
Moved by Councillor Austin, seconded by Councillor Mancini. The motion's now on the floor. What is your wish, Councillor Austin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Given the situation here, where this is truly a unique little spot, it actually moves the church away from further away from the homes. It doesn't make sense to require, and nothing will ever be built on this section of HR. It will literally just be the front lawn of the church. I mean, this was not what the setback transition policy was meant to do. So we should defeat the appeal, but I do understand from a neighborhood perspective what getting a letter about setbacks and having the big disruption of construction in the church and having this green area that was there really turn into the construction site. I know what they are going through in that regard, but that's not what this is tonight. So I urge council to defeat the appeal. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further speakers on the list. If someone would like to call the question on the motion. Question's been called. All those in favor of upholding the appeal? All those opposed?
Against.
Motion fails. The appeal has not been upheld. Thank you very much for all the participants this evening, and thank you, staff, for that. We'll move on to item 11, correspondence. I'll ask the legislative assistant if there's any correspondence received.
There is no correspondence received.
No correspondence. Are there any petitions to the LA First?
There were no petitions received by the clerk's office.
Any of the councillors want to put a petition on the floor? No? Okay, shocking. And there are no presentations from the public tonight. There's no information items brought forward, no reports, no motions, no in camera, no added items. Are there any notices of motion? Nobody wants to amend package A in the 2 weeks we have left? No? Okay, all right. So we have no speakers signed up for today's meeting. The date of the next meeting is September 29th, 2021. I would ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Councillor Cleary.
Councillor Cleary moves adjournment. We are adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks,
Councillor
everybody.
Smith, if you're coming down before you go downtown,